Hello, it's Scott Manley here with episode 96 of Interstellar Quest. And while we have the technology for warp drive, we are not yet going to go interstellar with it. No, we have a completely functioning warp drive capable spacecraft. But right now we are still in the testing phase. We are going to bring it for a little jaunt around our own solar system. Admin Kerman, Sean Kerman and Billy Bobkus Kerman all have space in this spacecraft. There's a couple of spare slots left, although they only anticipate being away for a couple of days. This is entirely self-contained. It has a 2.5 meter fusion reactor at the core with a thermal power converter unit sitting in there. This ship has 2 warp drive rings. Now these are of course the hand-waving warp drive field generator gizmos. What they do is they create exotic matter, which is actually negative matter, not to be confused with antimatter. Negative matter has negative mass and can therefore warp space-time in the opposite way to normal matter, which has all sorts of interesting implications for your stress momentum tensor, which lets you manipulate space-time and, in theory, travel very, very fast without actually accelerating. Now these are of course based on the Alcubierre drive, the Mexican scientist who figured out a solution to Einstein's field equations which would let a spacecraft move faster than the speed of light. Now when it was originally developed, it needed quite a bit of energy, and I'm not talking fusion power kind of energy, I'm talking taking the entire galaxy and converting its mass into pure energy, and that would have let the original formulation generate a warp field. They have actually optimized things a little since then, and now you only need to convert something similar to about a ton of mass to energy to get there. So that is actually within the theoretical scope of what I might imagine to be reasonable. Anyway, this thing is headed into space headed up vertically because it's not the most aerodynamic of objects. It does not want to move too quickly because we don't know how stable it is aerodynamically. Apparently, the air does not flow particularly efficiently around those donut-shaped warp field generators. So yeah, it went straight up, and then once it got to sufficient altitude, it goes sideways to bring itself into orbit. Not that it really needs to bother, but it's actually slightly more efficient to go up and then sideways. This is all utterly trivial maneuvers for someone like Sean Kerman, who has flown aircraft, he's flown spacecraft, and now he is going to be the pilot of the Kerbal's first ever warp-capable spacecraft. Now, of course, he's had to spend the last few days going on Kerbal television explaining to the people out there that it's not like science fiction. This is actually a real superluminal capable spacecraft. It is not a jump drive, it is not a hyperspace drive, it is a warp drive, and there are great differences between these various science fiction tropes. But now the spacecraft has safely reached orbit, it's time for us to prepare for our departure to extremely high speeds. Not going to go superluminal with this, but we need to power off the main engine and start charging the Alcubierre warp drive, right? That means we're starting to fill up those rings with exotic matter. This takes a lot of power, and immediately when we're charging 2 rings we get this warning that we're actually taking too much power. And indeed, because we have 2 rings simultaneously trying to charge, it's trying to take twice the amount of power available to the spacecraft. So yeah, I shut down one of the rings and let the other one charge both of them simultaneously. It says we have about 36% charge. That will be enough to get us to 10% off the speed of light. And I say 10% is of course the Kerbal speed of light, which is 1/10 of the speed of light we humans have to deal with. Yes, the Kerbal speed of light is a mere 30,000 kilometers per second, relatively sedate compared to our version, which is about 300,000 and will travel to the moon and back in about 2.5 seconds. Now we've had the drive charging for a bit, it's time that we lay in a course for an appropriate target. It would appear that Dres is in quite a good position because both Joule and Elu are on the other side of the sun. So rather than fly a little too close to our central star, it's a little safer if we head over to Dres. It's one that we have not yet visited. We've of course visited Duna and Eve, so we want to pick a new target, and preferably something with a gravity field low enough to permit us to actually soft land on it. So having laid in the course, we point our spacecraft at the pink reticule and prepare to activate the drive. Now, for reasons of field stability, we need to fold those radiators away inside the area enclosed by the warp field and activate! And we are away! But before we leave the Kerbal system, we want to shut everything down for a moment. And let's see if this was working. Well, it looks like a success to me. We have moved almost 30,000 kilometers in under 10 seconds. There's a speed unheard of in Kerbal space programming. Dropping out of warp has left us with our initial velocity, so we are now on an escape trajectory from the Kerbal system. This test was indeed extremely brief, but it was quite a ride for Sean Admin and Billy Bobkus. No, they are now ready to proceed to stage 2 of the test. They've finished at recharging the drive, ready to fold away the heat radiators. 3, 2, 1. Whoa! Yes! And now we're really moving off, flying past the orbit of Minmus. We're only 11 minutes into this mission, and by the time 12 minutes has passed, we will no doubt have left the Kerbal system entirely. There we go, at 11 minutes and 32 seconds, the spacecraft has left the Kerbal system. And they take this moment to announce to the planet Kerbal that this ship has been christened the Yogur, named after the first Kerbal who lost his life due to a little misadventure with a solid rocket booster and not much else. If this design of spacecraft is a success, then it may be followed by sister ships named Enming, Sonzin, Durdos. Those who have made the ultimate sacrifice in this pursuit of space technology, their names shall live on amongst the stars for years to come. So yeah, hyperspace and faster-than-light technology is still the work of science fiction. I mean, the interesting thing is that the faster-than-light capable drives didn't really become a major plot point in science fiction until about the 50s or whatever. I mean, prior to that, you could probably get away with saying that the aliens in your stories were coming from Mars. But obviously nowadays we're a little better educated and we know that we're not going to get invaded from Mars. But yeah, once you rule out all the planets in our own solar system, you have to look a little further afield. And in order to get there inside human lifetimes, you need to be travelling extremely quickly. So yeah, I mean, there's a few common ideas that are used. You have the warp drive, and they manipulate space-time. Then you have wormholes, where you somehow fold space, or you find naturally points of folded space that are connected by holes. And wormholes are actually a legitimate thing that can exist. Again, there are solutions to the Einsteinian field equations, which allow for wormholes. Einstein's original wormhole, the one that's described as an Einstein-Rosen bridge, turns out to be completely unstable because it collapses faster than the speed of light, which is quite a problem because it means you have to move faster than the speed of light to travel through it. And since you want to use this to travel faster than the speed of light, you get in a catch-22 situation. But there have been plenty of other formulations for wormholes which can in fact exist and can be made stable. Unfortunately, they need negative energy once again. But in more pure science fiction settings, you have things like hyperspace, which is an alternate dimension where space and time are different. Anyway, we're about to reach our destination, or at least we're about to fly past it. You can see it as this tiny little dot where we're going to fly past. So once we get at closest approach, we're going to drop out. Ooh, and suddenly everything is silence once again. And so we have retained our velocity from the orbit of Kerbal. So before we make any further course corrections, we decide to actually circularize our orbit and get it into approximately the same orbit as Dres, which gives us a maneuver node of about 7 kilometers per second. So for this circularization, of course, we're going to use the good old-fashioned low-tech fusion drive. Yes, that is something that is something from science fiction for us, but warp drive is a step beyond fusion drives. It tells us it'll take about 7 minutes to actually perform this burn, of course. For reasons of efficiency and me being a terrible, boring person, I decide to run things at a slightly lower thrust and go away and have dinner at the same time. It's kind of advantageous to be able to do this kind of thing. Of course, it'll be a lot easier in Kerbal Space Program 0.90 better than ever, because you will be able to tell your Kerbals to keep tracking the maneuver node if you've trained them up to the highest level of a pilot's skill. No doubt I will be playing that a little, but right now I'm of course stuck on the old version, and that's fine because of course I can still make those corrections myself. So shut the drive down, start charging the warp drive, and get ready to make that final jump into Dres space. Okay, Sean reports he has warmed up the drive enough. Exotic matter has accumulated. He has the target in sight ahead of him. And go! And as the spacecraft leaps to almost unimaginable velocities, they feel nothing because it's warping space around them. It's not really moving them, they're just staying still. You can't move faster than the speed of light. The trick is to manipulate space-time around you. And that is, of course, one of the things that makes people believe that the actual warp drive will never be possible, because it violates all sorts of problems with the cosmic speed limit. You see, if you can travel faster than the speed of light, you can actually send signals into the past and violate causality. But never mind, we are approaching Dres right now. We can see it flying past on the side there, and we're going to kill our velocity at closest approach. Bingo! Yes, killer velocity, not our grandfather. Okay, we are in the sphere of influence of Dres. We're only moving a few hundred meters per second now because we actually dealt with most of the excess velocity before we jumped into the sphere of influence. So this will actually, we got here with in less than 3 hours. Now it will take us probably a day or so to actually get to Dres using the old-fashioned drive system. But of course, that's fine. They're here to collect scientific data. And that's fine. They want to collect some data from high orbit. They want to collect some data as they go in. They want to tell the world what it feels like to be next to this asteroid, so that they can finally settle the debate as to whether it's a small planet, a minor planet, or a dwarf planet. Looking down, you see a massive canyon on the surface. It could be several kilometers deep. Too bad there's no atmosphere, because you'd like to parachute down there. Well, the good news is, if you really do want to parachute, your EVA packs are more than capable of lifting yourself against the puny gravity of this tiny moon. Admin Kerman decides he actually wants to take a step outside. No Kerbal has ever travelled this far from Kerbin before. He wants to step out, collect some observations about what it feels like to be floating in space so remote from his home world. The inability to scratch your chin is making concentrating on things impossible. From here, we can actually look back and see the family of planets huddled close to Kerbal, keeping themselves alive and active, while planets further out are enveloped in the cold of the night. Might as well take this moment to get a nice little photo of him floating in space, since we have this really nice observation cockpit here. Come on, Sean, get a little portrait of Admin and Dres together. There he is. He looks so serene. Of course, if we hit the warp drive button, he wouldn't be so happy after that, would he? Okay, enough of those extracurricular, extravehicular activities. We need you to get back inside so we can continue our science collection and everything else. Yeah, we can't fire the drive while you're still in space. First of all, we don't want to leave you behind. Secondly, the radiation would kill you in a few seconds. Okay, so we've adjusted our orbit just a little, bringing our periaps down to about 17 kilometers, a relatively grazing approach. And now, well, now we have to wait about 24 hours to actually get into closest approach here. Sean, of course, has the best seat in the house. He's the only one that can actually see the planet Dres approaching like this. Kind of reminds him of the moon, really, except that it has different structure of light versus dark areas. Perhaps it's made of similar materials, or perhaps it's not. I'm pretty sure that regardless of the mineralogical makeup of the moon versus Dres, the effects on the spacecraft would be roughly the same if they collided at this velocity. I mean, if anything, Dres is actually slightly safer because the orbital velocity is a little bit lower, but not by a huge amount. We're traveling at just over escape velocity, and that is roughly orbital velocity around the moon. Here we go, approaching periaps, and oh, there's the sun setting. Nice, just watching the sun disappear behind Dres. Now, of course, we're in the shadow, things are cooling down. Let's collect a crew report. It's very grey and icy down there. The vehicle assembly building team is going to use this to lobby for better grey-resistant landing gear. And once again, we get all the other data. The inability to scratch your chin is driving you nuts. What about the inability to scratch your... Oh, never mind. Well, we've moved into a capture orbit, and we've circularized... Oh, a little more than circularized. Going to have to do a little bit of a correction here, and then, then we can look for places to land. So, fire down, fire around, accelerate, and we're back in a circular orbit. Great! Now, where are we going to land, one asks. Well, we want to land on the daylight side, and we want to land in a location which is relatively flat, because this is obviously much taller than your average spacecraft, and it doesn't really have a wide landing base. So if the slope is more than about 10 degrees, then it is likely to fall over. Okay, so we've collected that data. It's asking for more data. We're just pushing data around to make sure that data is being collected. And only then, once we have organized our data, can we actually decide where to land. And you know what? We're going to fly right over this crater. And craters tend to have relatively flat bottoms because we know that it slopes out towards the side. So if you can kind of get in the middle of it, that's a pretty good idea for finding a relatively flat area. So that's where we're going to go. We slowed our orbit a little, and now it's just going to be a case of adjusting ever so carefully, slowing ourselves down for the descent, and planting ourselves in the middle of this little crater. Okay, now I think I might be going to hit the edge here, so instead of the middle, so I'm going to fire the engines. Oh, crikey, I forgot about time acceleration. No. Well, at least I am pointing the right way now. Just a little more time. There's our crater, and there is the bottom. And actually, it doesn't look quite as flat as I would like. Okay, throttle up to 100%. Irradiate everything in this crater, and now fall. Our horizontal speed is about 400 millimeters per second, which isn't so bad, actually. Okay. So now, just want to control the descent. We want to touch down really slowly, because the faster you touch down, the more of your vertical speed will be converted to rotational speed, and the rotational speed will be directed downhill. Okay, we're moving at about 2 meters per second. Of course, we have tons of flight time on this thing. The engine will continue to burn for a really long time. In fact, I think the reactor will give out before this fails. So I'm just going to touch on the ground. Unfortunately, we can't, stop and gather data, because if you need to get out, we will irradiate our people. Okay, and I think that's a touchdown. It's not falling over, and we've only deviated by about 10 degrees. Admin Kerman is going to take the first step outside. After all, Sean is important. We can't risk him just yet. Plants his feet on the surface. takes a report that says, for a planet of this size and gravity, there are an awful lot of craters, probably because it's in the asteroid belt, one would imagine. The surface sample says, well, this is a letdown. What? I sent you up there to collect rocks, not letdowns. Can't you even follow simple instructions? Well, this may have been a test flight, but it is historic. All the same, I bet you admin's pretty excited by not being turned inside out by an experimental warp drive technology. Wow, this warp thing really works! But before they return, we'll stop for a little press shot on the surface of the planet. Yes, admin, Billy Bobkus, and of course Sean Kerman, Andres. And I'll see you next time. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.